Welcome to the BocaFirst Bike Advocate channel. I'm Les Wilson, and with me today is Brian Stenberg. Brian has been living in Boca for 30-some years and been riding his bike basically like many of us since growing up. Thanks for coming on the channel.
Sure. Thanks, Les. Thanks for having me this morning. I appreciate it.
So you commute to work when you can. And you take a route from Southeast Boca to where you work up near the mall.
Correct.
What are some of the things about the bike infrastructure that you've observed in doing that commute?
Well, sometimes it's a little tricky getting across Palmetto Park Road at Military Trail, and certainly it's a little tricky at Verde and Military Trail because, you know, you're interacting with drivers. Hopefully everybody's respecting the rules of the road. One of the things I see quite often, both as a biker and as a walker, is folks who are simply distracted. They got a dog on their lap, they got a cell phone in their hand, they're just driving really fast, partly because they don't realize that they're going so fast. And I think that, you know, it would be really great if people, especially drivers, were a little more attentive to driving safely and to driving less than the speed limit. To being in less of a rush. I mean, that's one of the great things about being on a bike is that you're not necessarily in a rush if you're getting from point A to point B. You know, I'm not racing to the office. I'm not racing anywhere. I'm enjoying a pretty leisurely ride to get from here to there. And that's part of the appeal of biking is that you are out in the element. You're getting a little sunshine. You're getting some fresh air. In some cases, you're actually getting some peace and quiet. So it's a great way to get around, and that's why I love having my bike.
You're also taking a car off the road that would normally be on it if you were driving.
That's true. I still drive my car, partly because, you know, you got to consider that weather in the afternoon especially isn't always conducive to getting your bike home and, you know, not being struck by lightning or mowed down in a thunderstorm.
Let's talk about the infrastructure.
Sure.
I'm familiar with that route, and there's always drivers that are an issue, but there's also things about the bike infrastructure that are a challenge when you're making your way over there. Can you talk about what some of those are?
Yeah, so there's some goofy things. For instance, when you cross over Military Trail at Verde Trail, you get onto the sidewalk, which is designated as a bike route, and there's a utility pole pretty much in the middle of the sidewalk. You know, you see that down by the beach too. You go over the bridge on Palmetto Park Road, and it's the road's kind of constricted to begin with, and you have cars parked on one side, and then if you need to use the sidewalk for whatever reason and you have to share it with a pedestrian, there's utility poles right in the middle of the sidewalk. So there's a lot of little goofy things like that. For instance, along Palmetto Park Road at St. Andrews Boulevard, there's pedestrian crosswalks, but the sidewalk ends. There's no sidewalk to connect to another sidewalk on the east side of St. Andrews Boulevard. There's tons of little things like that, sort of low-hanging fruit. If you're looking at ways to connect these things, you can identify them and, you know, budget for correcting them as time goes by. It doesn't, you know, you don't have to wait 100 years to get that done. These are things you can do in 3 years, 5 years, you know, not 50 and not 100.
So you're not riding on the bike lanes on Military. You're actually getting on the sidewalk.
For the most part, I can't see behind me. I can't see who's coming behind me. I don't know how fast they're going. I don't know if they're on their phone or if they got the dog in the lap. I feel more comfortable getting on the sidewalk. And, you know, most of the time there's nobody on the sidewalk, and if there is, I'll give them a verbal cue that I'm coming up behind them, or I'll make sure that I slow down because I don't want to freak anybody out. I think that a lot of people are pretty careful, but it's those few people that aren't that careful, that are in a rush, that are distracted, that really worry me the most. So if I have a choice, I'm going to end up sometimes on the sidewalk because it just seems a little bit safer.
Yeah, it's a common thing. Once the speed gets high enough, like over 30 miles an hour, most people want to get off of the road, even if there's a painted marker for a bike lane. Right. It's that separation that brings a little bit more comfort. Right. What do you think about the notion of protected bike lanes that offer more than just a curb and mixing it up with pedestrians.
Yeah, I like them. Actually, here in Boca Square, when Southwest 12th Avenue was redone in front of Addison Meisner School, I always thought that the city could do a complete streets type of deal where you had a protected bike lane and you had shade. The city did come in and they had a generous use of trees to provide shade down the road, but that was about it. It's still a fairly heavily used road. There's quite a few families who bike their kids to school every day, but they do it on the sidewalk, and it gets pretty congested. The sidewalk is very wide on both sides of the street, and it's great. It's a great improvement over what it was, so I can't complain. But I think a lot of people looked at it and kind of hoped that the city would do that type of a situation where you had designated areas where you'd have walkers, bikers, and drivers sort of separated from each other, so you could have a safer flow.
Yeah, I find 12th Avenue really bizarre when I've ridden it all the way from where it starts on 18th and it merges into FAU. You have this route that takes you past residential neighborhoods on both sides, takes you past Addison Meisner Elementary, gets you up to Boca Middle, and then puts you into FAU. Mm-hmm. It would be an ideal route to move people on something other than a car, right? Yeah. Okay, so why don't you take 12th all the way up to Glades and then pop over the Diamond to get to your work location?
Sometimes I do. The speed limit on 12th Avenue is 30 miles an hour, but people tear down there at 50, 60 miles an hour, so that's an issue. Usually what I'll do is I'll cross over Palmetto Park Road. I'll stay on the sidewalk, then I'll cut into the neighborhood, or I'll go down to Meadows Road and jump past the middle school, pop over the bridge, look at the stuff in the water, and then go to the street in front of Boca High School. And at that point, I'm still on sidewalks for the most part because, again, you still have people that are tearing up and down trying to get to 95 or wherever they're going.
So one of the criticisms of our infrastructure is a lack of connectivity. When you're on the road as a cyclist, it becomes very clear.
I totally agree with you. And that spot, that FAU entrance at Glades, closer to the El Rio, is a great example because the El Rio Trail, with being able to connect you to Tri-Rail and the offices and so on Yamato, is so great. But how do you get to it? What do you have to do to get onto that from, say, 12th Avenue or Meadows Road? It's just weird. It doesn't flow the way it ought to flow. It took us 100 years to get to where we're at today with the automobile. We now see that the automobile isn't necessarily the best thing for us to get around, and there are alternatives in bikes. It shouldn't take us 100 years to fix things like that. And I don't think that we're in a position to put it off that much longer. A lot of what I see is that there is a perception and a reality to safety. If you perceive that you're not safe, that you perceive that you're going to get run over, you're going to do what you have to do to protect yourself. And in a lot of cases, that means encasing yourself in a vehicle and continuing to perpetuate what we have as the vehicle-dependent society that we are, which, I'm not against cars. I like cars. I have a couple of them myself. And so there are other ways to get around, and people like to have that choice. And, whether it's a health choice or an economic choice or an environmental choice, whatever their choice is, in the city of Boca Raton, it would be great if people have those choices and that they can exercise them and feel like they're not going to get mowed down. When you consider the life and death consequences of being on a bike in this city, and we've seen those life and death consequences for people who are just riding along. But the point is that if you're totally unprotected on a bike, all you got is a helmet versus a 5,000-pound vehicle, who's going to generally win that, right? And, I hear people saying, oh, the bikers don't follow the rules of the road. Yeah, that's true. A lot of bikers don't follow the rules of the road. Most of them do. Vehicles, the same thing. Most people follow the rules of the road. Some don't. When those some don't and you tangle, then it's fatal, usually to the guy who doesn't have any protection. Because at the end of the day, everybody could probably benefit from getting a little fresh air and some sunshine and being able to get out on their bike and enjoy it and feel at least relatively safe. We have the technology to figure these things out, and we have the knowledge to figure it out too.
Yeah, there's tons of cities that are way ahead of us in this regard, and they've already figured out ways of retrofitting safe bike infrastructure on the car-centric infrastructure that we've built.
Well, it's a capital improvement that you have to have the motivation to do it. And I think part of getting the motivation to put capital into a project like that is to actually get out on your bike and to see what it is that's deficient. And if you live in a part of town where it takes you 20 minutes to get out of your neighborhood in order to get onto a public street, maybe you need to trailer your bike out to the entrance and park at the guard gate and drive around on the streets to see what it is that people are complaining about. If you only do it once a year as a photo op during bike month, all you're doing is you're paying lip service to it. The people who are allocating funds for these things need to live it and see what it is and see why they're allocating it and just to understand it better. There tends to be a lack of interest because they don't put your hands on it. You got to put your hands on this stuff. You have to see the conflicts, and you end up being part of the conflicts in order to better understand what it is you're doing.
I think we're in an interesting moment in the city where Fran Knocklis, council member, is a triathlon competitor, and Mark Widger was the vice chair of our bike board, citizen bike board, for many years. Boca is not poor, and we likely could easily find the way to do this, but what I think I'm hearing you say is we also need to have the will to do it.
Having the will to do it and to stick with it and to make it happen is pretty important. And again, I don't understand why we would want to really wait eons to get those things done. There's so many people who would enjoy that stuff today if they just had the feeling, the perception that it was safe to do it. I live in Boca Square, right? We have Addison Meisner School. All the kids who go there live within 2 miles of it. A lot of them walk, a bunch of them bike, but I guarantee you that if the parents felt the commute to the school was safer, they would realize, well, I really don't have to sit in my car for 20 minutes waiting to drop off or pick up. And they would actually be more likely to ride their kids to school on their bikes. And when they're in middle school, to send their kids on their own on their bikes.
Yeah, 12th Avenue also goes to Boca Middle, right. And as you know, I've ridden and filmed as much of the bike map as I could safely.
Right.
I was fortunate one morning in filming it during school where kids were coming from this area across Palmetto to go to Boca Middle, and what I discovered was they cross without a crossing just to take that quieter, calmer route through the residentials and go in the back door at Meadows Park.
Yeah.
And that's the way they chose to go in. So even our kids are being forced to make a risk assessment to avoid what is a very chaotic intersection with the guards and car lines, people in a rush trying to get across it. They just dashed across to go that route.
And that's a really important point, is that particular connectivity between Boca Square, Royal Oak Hills, and in the neighborhood south, and what's north of Palmetto Park Road, because you do have obviously a lot of kids going to Boca Middle and Boca High. I watch people coming across at 9th Avenue, Palmetto Park Road, where the crosswalk is on the side where the fire department is at, and you have people, a long line of traffic on northbound 9th Avenue, and people are just bolting to get through that light because they don't want to have to wait another couple minutes. And it's kind of scary. I got 4 kids, so I get the fear that parents have that their kids are going to get run over.
There's this element of NIMBY, of yes, we want this, we want that, but if it means adding bike lanes or a protected bike lane through your neighborhood, all of a sudden you have the actual people that would benefit from it objecting to it.
So I think people are changing, that people's attitudes are changing for the better, I think, because they realize that it's not a weird choice to take your bike to Publix. It's not a weird choice to go for a walk. Those things aren't as weird as they used to be, you know, because when you see normal people, like, you know, I consider myself a normal person going out on my bike. If you see other normal people doing that stuff, and I'm not all suited up in my tight Speedos and all that, you know, racing with a bunch of 55-year-olds down A1A, I'm just an average guy riding my bike around. People are like, oh, that's just an average guy riding his bike around, and he's made a conscious choice to do it. And I'm not doing it for the environment. I'm not doing it for any symbolic cause. I'm just doing it because it's an option, and it's a good option, and it is healthy, you know. Yeah.
So, Brian, thanks for taking the time out to do this. Why don't we go enjoy the ride?
Let's do it.
Okay.